I want to talk today to you about courage that it takes to do something new in life and to start something new and to change our lives a little bit and not to always be in the same place that we are always in, just to move a little bit, you know. And I told this morning our group that was here, as a pastor, I've learned that you can't change people. You just can't change people. You can preach until you're blue in the face, but people just like to do what they want to do. And we all have habits and we all have things that we do in our lives, and it's very hard, difficult for people to change. But what I'll try to do is talk to you a little bit about how to move your life and where does it come from, this change. And I think until a person wants to do something for themselves from the deep inside, they can listen to all kinds of sermons and statistics and preachers and talks and data, and it's just not going to help them move until you're really ready to move. And I want to give you some examples here. We are working to get this thing on the screen, but if not, you have your outline. Most of it is there. So, for example, how many people here in this room would say that their family is important to them? Everybody, right? 98, 99% of Americans, they say that family is very important to them, and yet, in another statistic, you will find out that an average father will spend, on average, 5 minutes a day with their kids. But we say that family is important, right? Family is very important to me, but I'm going to spend only 5 minutes with my kids? And we can say the same thing about marriage, right? If you ask married people how important is your spouse to you or your marriage, your relationship, everybody is going to say, oh yeah, that's very important to me. But what do they do to stay together? How much time do they spend on each other? How much time do they spend working together and growing together and improving what they have? You see, so it's one thing to say something, and yet it's another thing to do something about it. How about this next one? How many people here would say that their health is important to them? Okay, you want to hear some statistics? Everybody in America says that their health is important to them. 65% of Americans are obese. 65%. 33% morbidly obese. That's 1/3 of the country. But everybody says, health is very important to me. I want to be in good shape. You see, we all say that. I say that. I say that to myself every year. I'm going to start riding my bike this year, and I'm going to do a century, and I'm going to do all of that, you know. And then, you know, the evening comes, 8 o'clock to 8:30 in the evening, and you get hungry, and then you make yourself a sandwich, and then you eat it, and then you get some ice cream, and then you get a cookie, and before you know it, right? Before you know it, you're saying, oh yeah, health is very important to me, but you're not doing anything about it. We don't change. We just remain in that same mode of living, even though our brain is telling us something different. What about this one? How many people say that their finances are important to them? Everybody, right? We all want to have healthy finances. 76% of Americans are in debt to credit cards alone. 76%. Now, I want you to hear this next statistic, because this applies to every single one of us. 96% of all Americans will retire and have financial distress. 96% of all Americans, the richest single country in the world. There is more dollars in this country than anywhere else in the world. There is more opportunity. There is more better paying jobs. I mean, if any country has it, this one does. And at the end of the day, 96% of us will retire in financial hardship. This is the statistics from U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So we have become complacent in our finances. We have become complacent in our family relationships. We have become complacent about our health and well-being. How about God? How many people in this group, and I bet in this group right now today, that 100% would say that God is important to us, right? 95% of Americans say that God is important to them. 95%. If you go out on the street and you start asking people, is God important to you? 95, 9.5 out of all 10 people is going to say that God is important. But only 9% attend church regularly. So you have a country of 300 and what, 30, 40 million people? Everybody says God is important, but only 9% attend church, and only 2% are involved in some kind of a ministry. So are we really a Christian country? Are we really a healthy country? Are we really a wealthy country? You see, we say all of these things, but we remain complacent about changing. We are complacent and comfortable where we are. Therefore, we are unwilling to move and improve. Unwilling to move closer to God, too. Because we're perfectly fine with our spiritual situation where we are. We're not perfect. It's okay. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have a few drinks. I'm just struggling with drugs, cigarettes. It's okay. I'm just a human being. Temper, oh yeah. I got a little bit of that, but it's okay. Maybe I'm a little bit promiscuous, but you know, who isn't? We're living in the world where it's okay. But I go to church. I get mad at people, cheat my boss, cheat the people that work for me, but it's okay. And the same thing with our relationship with God, you know. And I'm not saying this because I want us to be judgmental, you know. That's not the point. The point is that we get to the point where we just, things that are not normal and that should not be normal have become normal. And we just accept it because we are comfortable and we don't want to change. We don't want to take all of these steps to change, to get out, to move, to improve, to get closer to God, to bring Him into our life, to walk on water like Peter did, that we're going to see here in this story, you see. If you dare nothing, then when the day is over, nothing is all you will have gained. So if we don't dare to be closer to God, if we don't dare to exercise our faith in a more prominent and riskier way, how are we going to get closer to God? If we always do the same thing, if we always act in the same way, if we just go to church because it's a thing to do, but we are really not committed to God all the way, you know, then at the end of the day, you have gained nothing. So to sail in uncharted waters, that's a whole different story. There is a story here in Matthew chapter 14, talks about Jesus and his disciples. They just finished preaching the gospel to a whole group of people, and Jesus tells them to get across the sea to the other side because he's going to meet them there, and he wants them to get ready for the next day, get things organized, and so on. So we read in Matthew 14, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. And I picture Jesus on the side of this mountain. You know, he was tired. He just dismissed all of these crowds. He fed them. He healed them. He taught them. He served them, right? And he's up on the side of this mountain, you know, praying to God. The sun is coming down slowly, darkness, but yet there in the distance he sees in that little boat his disciples, and they are trying to cross. But while they are doing that, the storm has come, right? And this reminds me of, this story is about us. We live our life, and we are blessed to be in this country, and we have all of these things, but yet so many people are struggling, in all of these different areas. And storms, they come, they raise up, and you don't know how you're going to get through them. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And wind is against us too, right? A lot of times storms of life come into our life, daily life. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all, is what Helen Keller says. And I like that, but I'm also thinking sometimes too much adventure is too much, right? Sometimes I don't want all of the adventure. I want a little bit of peace. Adventure is good if you do it with God. If you are just having the negative kind of adventure, then that's not good. But these guys, they found themselves kind of in trouble. Wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, so by now the sun is gone, the moon is up, it's dark outside. He came to them walking on the sea. So Jesus, he comes to them walking on the sea. Now, these same guys who just a few hours earlier witnessed Jesus perform miracles and wonders and things that just don't happen, they freak out when they see him. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. Cried out in fear. Jesus is just walking on water. To him, it doesn't make any difference if it's water, if it's earth, if it's sky. He's just doing what he's doing. He's just walking to them. And finally, Jesus says to them, he speaks to them and says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Don't be afraid. And Jesus says that to us, to you and me. And we hear that. We go to church and preachers preach, and they say, "Don't be afraid. The Bible says so." Right? And it's one thing to hear it. It's another thing to internalize it. And yet it's another thing to live it. So Peter says to Jesus, answered him, "Lord, if it is you," he's looking for a confirmation that this is Jesus. He says, "Lord, if this is really you, tell me to come out to you on the water." What's the logic here? What if it is not Jesus and he tells him to come out? I just don't get it. Peter says, "If it is you, tell me to come out." So what do I think? I think he knew it was Jesus. Deep inside, he knew, right? Because he wouldn't just put his trust into some demon spirit. He could have killed him, right? So he says, "If it is you, tell me to come out." I mean, there was other ways to confirm Jesus' identity. He could have said, "Well, come on in, come a little bit closer to the boat so we can check you out and make sure that it is you." He didn't have to offer to go out there into the water. Back then they didn't have IDs, so he couldn't ask for an ID, but he didn't have to do this either. But he does. He says, "Lord, if this is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus does. Jesus says, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat. You know how boats have big sides. It's shaking, it's moving. He gets out of the water and he steps out and he's on solid footing. He's not sinking. He's walking. And he came to Jesus. So Peter did something that no other human being had ever done before. I mean, he walked on water. We don't know if it was 20 feet or 50 feet or 100 feet, but he walked on water in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the night. That took courage. And you know, as human beings, we have that. We are made in the image of God, and we have this courage, you know. From time to time, our courage just rises up, and we are ready to change the world. We are ready to step outside, and we are ready to just do things that nobody has ever done before. We are ready to try new things. We are ready to take risks. We are ready to, walk out of the bad situations. We are ready to tell our boss to, take it or leave it. I mean, we are just full of courage in moments of life. We have that. But not all the time. Not all the time. If you did it all the time, people would think you were crazy, right? Because you would be stepping in front of trains and whatnot. So we don't do it all the time. But we do have. We are built with it, that we have courage. So for a moment there, he's walking on water. And he's walking to Jesus. And I like this next quote by Waldo Emerson that says, "Do not be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. Don't be too timid about your actions." And I think a lot of people are timid because they're afraid. Afraid to experiment. Afraid to do something new. Afraid to say no. Afraid to say yes. Afraid to take a risk. Too timid. Peter was not. If anything, he was not timid. Not at that moment. He says, okay, I'm walking on water. And he did. And I think there is a lesson there for us to recognize that we are children of God. And God does not want his children scared, afraid, timid, hesitant. He doesn't want that. Because it implies a lack of faith in our Father. Any one of those traits, when you're unsure, when you have to test the waters 100 times, when you have to, weigh everything 1,000,000 times because you're scared of the outcome, God is thinking, hey, you know what? I'm behind you. Hey, back here, it's me. What are you doing? Just go for it. I'm in your corner. I'm your Father. That's how God is thinking, you see? So there, for a moment, Peter is that guy, full of courage. He's walking on water. But then he saw the wind, and he became afraid. And I just want you to think about the moment that he was in. I mean, think about this. I just want you to feel it. Middle of the night. It's probably warm out there in Israel, not too cold, but the wind is blowing. The waves are up. You're soaking wet because you were just walking on water amongst the waves. You're soaking wet. The wind is blowing. Moonshine is glimmering. And for a moment there, you lose sight of Jesus. And you get that feeling. You know when you get that feeling in here? A little bit of fear. You're like, should I or should I not? Happens, right? When you, just as you're crossing that yellow light every time, right? It turns yellow and you're like, should I or shouldn't I? And then you have to make a decision either to step on the gas or step on the brake. But there is always, you know that feeling, right? You don't want to do it, but sometimes it's too late and you got to do it. And Peter felt this for a second. And the second he felt that feeling of fear and hesitancy, what happens? He just goes all the way in. Water is above his head. He's soaking wet, and all he sees now, he's absorbed. He's immersed, totally immersed in his problem. And when that happens, you can't see anything else. When the problem comes and you are not looking at the Lord, at Jesus, you become immersed. You become soaked. The salt water is in your mouth and nose and eyes. The waves are tossing you back and forth, and you just can't focus on anything else. The problem is too big. How do you deal with watching your loved one getting sick and getting ready to die? How do you deal with a failing relationship that you know is not going to last? How do you deal with your own personal failures, regrets, decisions that you made in the past, and now you're like, oh, why the heck did I do that? And you get that nasty, overwhelming feeling of dread. This is what happened to Peter, right there. I mean, Jesus is right there, the guy who was just feeding thousands and walking on water. And right there next to him, he loses his faith. But the beautiful thing is that God understands who we are. And He understands our struggles and failings. And He understands that we are living in a faulty world. And He understands that there are spiritual powers around us, demonic powers, literally, that are always working against us to try to distract us and discourage us and pull us away from Jesus. God understands it. And Jesus knew that at that moment. I believe that in that ocean that night, on that sea, there was more than Jesus. I believe there were other forces at play too. I believe there were other forces there who knew who Peter and the rest of the disciples were going to become. And they worked hard, overtime, night shift, to get this guy to drown, to lose his faith in Jesus. And as he's drowning, he has enough sense and composure to cry out to Jesus, Lord, save me. And as soon as the words didn't even come out of his mouth, Jesus already had him grabbed by his hand and pulled him out. And this is what's great about Jesus. Even before you have a chance to speak the word, He's there for you. He's going to pull you out. But do you have composure? Or are you so absorbed in the moment of trouble that you can't even think what to do next? And some people are living lives of desperation and they don't know what to do next. And if you're one of those people, I just want to tell you today, just say same thing that Peter said, Lord, save me. That's all, nothing else. And the moment you say those words, those 3 words, the moment you say that, you know what happens? You are giving a permission to the forces of God to intervene in your life. And you're closing the door on the forces of evil that are trying to separate you from the presence of Jesus. So that's what happened there. This is a spiritual battle. This is not about Peter not being able to swim and now, Jesus is saving him from physical death. This is about Peter being saved by Jesus from the eternal death. This is about Jesus restoring to Peter courage that he just lost. This is about Jesus connecting to Peter in such a way that later on Peter becomes a tremendous warrior for God. Somebody said without struggle, success has no value. People inherit things, they are given things. If you're given a car, it has no value. If you go out there and work for one, you will cherish it. Peter cherished this experience and others with Jesus because he struggled. He struggled when he denounced Jesus. He struggled here in the sea with his faith. But later on, when everything was said and done, Peter could value his successes because of that same struggle. And same goes with us. If you have struggle in life, spiritually, it's good. It's a good thing. Because when the success comes, you're going to value it. You're going to say, I went through that. And you know how many people I know who say to me, Pastor Gordon, you know what kind of a person I was and no longer am. Because Jesus helped me. And they value those struggles that they went through. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. So, 4 steps to sail in uncharted waters. Very simple. Little kids could remember this. Call on the Lord, number 1. Call on the Lord. Do you want to change things in the next year, 2019? I want to change things. A lot of things in my life and in the life of my church family. But in order to do that, we got to call on the Lord. Lord, if it is really you, tell me to come to you by walking on water. I want to do a lot of things this next year, but I need to ask God, Lord, if you want me and us to do these things, let us know. You got to involve God in your life. You got to involve God in your problems. You got to involve God in your wins that you're going to have in this next year. You can't just go at it alone. So I'm saying to you, you got to, if you're going to change your life, it's not going to be because you heard me speak or somebody else. It's going to be because you have decided deep inside here, in your gut, right here, in your gut. This is where the decisions are made, not here, in your gut. When you have enough and you say, okay, I'm going to change this thing. I'm going to be what I know I can be and what God wants me to be because He's my Father and He gives me all power that I can do whatever I set my mind to. But once you make that decision here, then there is no stopping you. Then I don't need to come here thinking about how do I motivate somebody. Because you motivate yourself. You take the step yourself. So that's what I'm trying to get at. So call on the Lord, number 1. If you want to move, if you want to change your life, then you got to also listen for his answer. And we don't listen to God enough. We talk to God a lot, but we don't listen to God. And we don't know, sometimes we don't know how to listen to God. Sometimes we're standing there saying, Lord, talk to me. But we don't know how to listen to Him. So we need to ask for discernment. We need to ask for the gift of discernment that God would help us understand when His voice is talking to us and not all of the other voices that are out there in the world. Especially voices that are also in our head. So call on the Lord, listen to His answer, and then step out in faith. The boat represents safety and comfort. That's what the boat represents. Peter could have said to Jesus, well, you come over to me so I can take a closer look. Why? Because I know it's stormy and it's crazy out there, but at least I'm in the boat. And people say that, it's crazy out there and I have this lousy paying job, but you know what? At least I have it. This lousy, crazy marriage, where I'm getting beat up and abused, but at least I'm married. Gee whiz. And people do these things. We settle for less because we are scared to take a risk, to step out of the boat, and waste your life, not reach your full potential because of fear. because we don't want to move. I read a story about this captain of a ship. Let's see, he was a captain of a United States Navy ship, big destroyer, battleship. And they're sailing in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden he sees this light, and this other ship is coming at them pretty quickly, So he gets on the radio and he says, he talks to them and he says, "This is Captain so-and-so, and you got to alter your course." And the response comes back, and the other guy says, "Well, this is Seaman Third Class Jones, and you better alter your course." And the captain is like, "I'm the captain. Who is this guy?" So he gets on the horn again, and he's like, "You better move, son, because I'm the captain of a battleship." And the guy answers back and says, "Well, you may be the captain, but I'm the lighthouse, and if you don't move, you're going to hit the cliff." So that's what happens with us. Sometimes we are so set in our way, we are going to go this direction, and everybody else needs to move. Right? Well, God is saying, step out of the boat. Change the direction. Take the risk and go in a different direction. And God said that to Peter. And once you do that, and once you take that step, and once you change the direction and take the risk, then the last step is focus on Jesus. Focus on Jesus. Don't take your eyes off of Him no matter what. If the bullets are flying right next to your head, don't think about it. Focus on Jesus. And that's what we need to do as Christians every day. But when he looked around at high waves, he was terrified and began to sink. You can begin to sink in a matter of minutes when you start focusing on the wind and salt and water and being wet and all of your problems. You're going to sink. When you focus on Jesus, you're going to walk on water. So what's it going to be, folks? What's it going to be? You're going to be a risk taker in this next year? You want to get out of the boat? You want to change your life? You want to improve things in your life? You want to be a more dedicated Christian? You want to have a closer relationship with Jesus? Step out and say, "Lord, I need your help. I want to change, and I want to be a risk taker. I want to focus on Jesus." And God says, when you call on my name, I'm going to be there for you. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Just like Peter did. And this is my message for us today. We think about our own waves, our own ocean, our own problems, and step out of that boat with Jesus' help. I want to tell you that in January, next week, we are going to have the communion service. And I think we may have another baptism. I'm waiting for the word on that. But in January, we want to start a little different program. And me and Milos are working on a system of steps, a pathway to becoming a true disciple of Jesus. And it's going to be based on the life and story and experiences of the disciples of Jesus from the moment they were called to the moment when they were sent out into the world on their own, and the moment when they functioned on their own. So here, when they were called to follow Jesus, they were babies. They were scared. They didn't know what they were doing. 3 years later, these men became giants of faith. They became spiritual leaders. They became the foundation of the Christian church. Why? Because in those 3 years they grew. So we're going to look at the experiences that they have had with Jesus. We're going to look at the lessons that they learned with Jesus. And we're going to try over the next year, 2019, from January until December, to apply those lessons to our own lives here in this church, so that we too can go from being babies in Christ to being spiritual giants, to being people who can actually be out there on our own in this crazy world and stand our own ground and do things for the Lord that many of us are not doing right now and that we could be doing. So that's what I want to do this next year, and I hope that you will be a part of that. That's going to start January 5th. If you miss a Sabbath, somebody asked me this morning, what happens if I miss a Sabbath? We're going to have the materials, and we're going to have the videos, so you're going to be able to follow right along. Anyways, that's my message. I'm stepping off. God bless you. Amen.